Welcome, listeners, to the Viking Siege of Paris, a series that plunges into the turbulent waters of the 9th century Europe, a time when a new terror emerged from the icy north. We're about to embark on a journey through history, exploring the dramatic clash between the Frankish kingdoms and the fearsome Vikings, culminating in the epic sieges of Paris. But before we reach the blood-soaked shores of the Seine, we must first venture north, to the land of the midnight sun, the realm of myth and legend, Scandinavia. Here, amidst the towering fjords and windswept landscapes, a unique culture was forged, a culture that would forever alter the course of European history. To understand the Vikings, we must shed the Hollywood stereotypes of horned helmets and mindless brutality. These were a complex people, driven by a potent mix of pragmatism and ambition. They were farmers, fishermen, traders, explorers, and yes, warriors. But their motivations were far more nuanced than simple bloodlust. Let's turn to the esteemed historian Peter Sawyer, author of the Oxford Illustrated History of the Vikings. Sawyer paints a vivid picture of this era, reminding us that the Viking Age was not simply an era of raiding and plunder. It was also a period of significant cultural achievement, marked by advances in shipbuilding, navigation, and artistic expression. Indeed, the Vikings were master shipbuilders. Their iconic longships, sleek and formidable, were technological marvels of their time. These vessels, crafted with meticulous care, allowed them to traverse vast distances from the icy waters of the Arctic to the sunny shores of the Mediterranean. To grasp the ingenuity of these vessels, we turn to The Viking World, a comprehensive study by archaeologists James Graham Campbell and Dafydd Kidd. They describe the intricate construction of these ships. The Viking ship was a masterpiece of technology, a testament to their ingenuity and craftsmanship. Clinker-built with overlapping planks, these vessels were both strong and flexible, capable of navigating rivers, coastlines, and the open sea. Imagine, if you will, the sight of these longships, their dragon-headed prows slicing through the waves, carrying bands of fierce warriors eager for glory and riches. But what drove them to leave their homelands and embark on these perilous voyages? For answers, we consult the Cambridge History of Scandinavia, a monumental work edited by Knut Helle. This volume sheds light on the complex factors that fueled Viking expansion. He writes, a combination of factors fueled Viking expansion. Population pressure, political ambition, and the lure of wealth and land all played a role. The desire for glory and the pursuit of adventure also motivated these intrepid seafarers. These were not simply barbarians driven by blind rage. They were strategic thinkers, exploiting the political fragmentation and relative wealth of continental Europe. The crumbling Carolingian Empire, with its weak defenses and rich monasteries, presented, of course, a tempting target for these ambitious raiders. But let's delve even deeper into the specific reasons for why the Vikings set their sights on Francia. It wasn't merely a random choice. The Frankish kingdoms, for all their apparent power, presented a tempting target. First and foremost, Francia was wealthy. Monasteries and churches were overflowing with gold, silver, and religious artifacts, and were ripe for the picking. Prosperous towns and cities offered the promise of loot and slaves, and the fertile agricultural lands of the Seine and the Loire were attractive to people who also knew the value of farming. Secondly, the political landscape of Francia was in turmoil. The once mighty Carolingian Empire was crumbling, weakened by internal strife and incapable of mounting a unified defense. This left the kingdom vulnerable to Viking incursions, which often penetrated deep within Francia through their network of rivers. The Vikings, with their superior shipbuilding and navigation skills, could strike swiftly and unexpectedly. Their longships, unlike the heavier Frankish vessels, could easily navigate both the open sea and the intricate network of rivers that crisscrossed the Frankish kingdoms. And let's not forget the Viking warriors themselves. Fearsome and battle-hardened, they were often better equipped and more experienced than the Frankish levies raised to oppose them. Their reputation for ruthlessness preceded them, instilling fear and demoralizing their enemies. And so, with their longships laden with warriors and their hearts set on plunder, the Vikings set their sights on new horizons. Little did the inhabitants of Francia know that a storm was brewing on the horizon, a storm that would bring fire and sword to their shores. Among their many targets, one city would stand out as a symbol of resistance and defiance: Paris. Picture this: Paris in the 9th century. Not the sprawling metropolis we know today, but a smaller walled city nestled on the Ile de la Cite, an island in the Seine River. Life within its walls flowed at a gentler pace, its inhabitants going about their daily routines, unaware of the impending doom approaching from the north. The Vikings, masters of surprise and stealth, exploited the calm of a spring morning, sailing up the Seine with chilling efficiency. Their longships materialized on the horizon. These vessels, described by contemporary sources as long serpents or dragons of the sea, were a terrifying spectacle against the peaceful backdrop of the river. To truly grasp the impact of this first raid, we turn to the Annales Bertinaniani, a meticulously kept historical record from the Abbey of Saint-Barthas. It provides a concise but impactful account. It says, "This year, the Northmen, having entered the Seine with their ships, caused great slaughter in the city of Paris, and they burned the church of St. Peter, which is situated on the island, and also the church of St. Genevieve, which is situated on the hill." This short entry highlights the key elements of the attack: the Vikings' arrival via the Seine, the significant loss of life, and the burning of two prominent churches. While the Annales Bertiniani doesn't delve into graphic detail, it does convey the scale of the destruction. They say they plundered all the places that they could reach with their ships, and no one resisted them effectively. The source also provides a crucial detail about the timing of the attack. They arrived at Paris on Easter Sunday. The Vikings' arrival on this particular day, a holy day for Christians, adds a layer of sacrilege to their attack. It might suggest a deliberate intent to shock and demoralize the Christian population, or simply take them by surprise on a day where they would probably celebrate with friends and perhaps their routines were more lax. Another contemporary source, Scoturum Historia by the Irish chronicler Marianus Scotus, corroborates the account of the attack and adds further details. The Vikings devastated the city of Paris, and many were slain by the sword. The Chronicon Fontanellanense, a chronicle from the Abbey of Fontanelle, provides additional context about the Viking campaign leading up to the attack on Paris. The Northmen, having sailed up the Seine, plundered Rouen and other towns before reaching Paris. This passage reveals that the raid on Paris was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger Viking campaign along the Seine River. The Vikings, using their longships to navigate inland, were able to strike at multiple targets, spreading terror and destruction throughout the region. Imagine the scene. The serenity of the city is shattered by the terrifying war cries of the Vikings. Homes and buildings engulfed in flames, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning wood. The streets filled with fleeing citizens and the grim aftermath of violence. The Vikings, armed with axes, swords, and spears, were relentless in their assault. They stormed through the city, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Homes were plundered and set ablaze, churches desecrated, and the inhabitants killed or captured. The Annales Fuldenses, a chronicle from the Abbey of Fulda in present-day Germany, offers a glimpse into the aftermath of the raid. The city of Paris was left in ruins, its churches and houses burned, its inhabitants slain or scattered. But why was Paris so vulnerable to attack in 1845? Dr. Simon Copeland, a leading expert on the Viking Age in Francia, offers this explanation in his book The Vikings in Francia. The Frankish kingdoms in the mid-9th century were beset by internal division and political instability. This weakness was compounded by lack of preparedness for the new type of warfare waged by the Vikings. Copeland argues that the fragmentation of the Carolingian Empire after the death of Charlemagne created a power vacuum that the Vikings were quick to exploit. The Frankish kings, preoccupied with internal struggles, neglected their defenses, leaving their kingdoms vulnerable to Viking raids. This lack of preparedness is further emphasized by Dr. Peter Sawyer in the Oxford Illustrated History of the Vikings. The Franks, traditionally a land-based power, had little experience in naval warfare. They were ill-equipped to deal with the swift and mobile Viking longships. Sawyer highlights the mismatch between the Frankish military, geared towards land-based warfare, and the Vikings' naval superiority. The Franks simply lacked the ships and the expertise to effectively defend their coastlines and rivers against the Viking raiders. The archaeological record also sheds light on the vulnerability of Paris in this period. Excavations in the city have revealed that the fortifications at the time of the 1845 raid were relatively weak. In his article, The Archaeology of Viking Age Paris, Dr. Richard Hodges notes, the defenses of Paris in the mid-9th century consisted primarily of a Roman-era wall, which was in a state of disrepair. The city lacked the strong fortifications that would be built in later centuries. Hodges' research suggests that the existing defenses of Paris were inadequate to withstand a determined Viking attack. The city walls, dating back to Roman times, were crumbling and offered little protection against the Vikings' onslaught. The raid of 845 served as a wake-up call for the Franks, forcing them to re-evaluate their defenses and adapt to the new reality of the Viking threat. It marked a turning point in the history of Paris, prompting the construction of stronger fortifications and the development of new military strategies to counter the Viking menace. The first Viking raid on Paris was a traumatic event, leaving a lasting scar on the city's psyche. But it also served as a catalyst for change, prompting the Franks to strengthen their defenses and prepare for future confrontations with the Northmen. The raid of 1845 had been a wake-up call for the Parisians. They knew that the Vikings would be back, and they were determined to be ready. In the intervening years, they had strengthened their defenses, repairing the old Roman walls and constructing new fortifications. The Annals Bertiniani records these efforts. After the devastation caused by the Northmen, Charles the Bold ordered the city of Paris to be fortified with strong walls and towers. But these efforts weren't limited to just the walls and the tower. Historian Janet L. Nelson, in her book Charles the Bold, describes a more comprehensive approach to defense. Charles the Bold understood the strategic importance of Paris. He not only strengthened its physical defenses, but also sought to improve the city's ability to withstand a siege by ensuring adequate supplies and provisions. This meant stockpiling food, weapons, and other essential resources within the city walls, preparing for the possibility of a prolonged siege. However, the Vikings too had learned from their previous raid. This time, they arrived not with a small raiding party, but with a massive fleet, reportedly numbering hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors. Their leader, Siegfried, was a seasoned warlord, determined to conquer the city and claim its riches. The scale of the Viking force is described in the Annal Medastini, a chronicle from the Abbey of St. Vast in Arras. An immense multitude of Northmen, having assembled a great fleet, entered the Seine and laid siege to Paris. To put this into perspective, historian John Haywood, in his book The Penguin Historical Atlas of the Viking, estimates that the Viking force that besieged Paris in 1885 was likely the largest they had ever assembled for a single operation, possibly numbering as many as 40,000. Think about that, 40,000 Vikings outside your gates. The Vikings arrived in November of 885, and the siege began. They established their camp on the banks of the Seine, surrounding the city and cutting off its supply lines. The Parisians, led by Count Odo, a brave and resourceful leader, prepared for a long and arduous struggle. The Annales Fuldenses provides a vivid description of the siege. It says, the Northmen, having surrounded the city with their ships and warriors, began to attack it with various siege engines, hurling stones and fire at the defenders. The Vikings employed a variety of siege tactics, including battering rams, catapults, and siege towers. They attempted to breach the city walls, set fire to the gates, and tunnel beneath the fortifications. In his book Viking Warfare, archaeologist and historian Neil Price provides detailed analysis of these siege tactics. He says the Vikings were adept at adapting their tactics to the specific circumstances. In the siege of Paris, they employed a combination of traditional siege warfare techniques, such as battering rams and siege towers, along with more innovative approaches like attempting to undermine the city walls, which means digging tunnels under the walls, causing them, hopefully, to collapse. The Parisians, however, fought back with courage and determination. They rained down arrows, spears, and stones on the attackers, and they repelled numerous attempts to scale the walls. The heroic defense of Paris is recounted in the Bella Parisiae Urbis, a poem written by Abu Selnus, a monk who witnessed the siege. He writes, Count Odo, with a small band of brave men, defended the city with great valor, repelling the attacks of the pagans, and inspiring his people to resist. But Abo also provides chilling details of the fighting, describing, the air was thick with arrows, like a swarm of locusts. The ground was stained with blood, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. The siege of Paris dragged on for months, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The Parisians endured hardship and privation, but they refused to surrender. Count Odo, through his courage and leadership, became a symbol of the resistance, rallying the citizens and inspiring them to fight for their freedom. In her book, The Frankish Kingdoms in the 9th Century, historian Rosamund McKitterick highlights the significance of Odo's leadership. Odo's defense of Paris was crucial in preventing the Vikings from gaining control of a strategically vital city. His actions not only saved Paris, but also helped to preserve the integrity of the West Frankish Kingdom. The Siege of Paris in 1885 to 1886 was a protracted and brutal affair, a tense back and forth between the determined Viking besiegers and the resilient Parisian defenders. Let's explore some of the key turning points and tactical maneuvers that shaped the course of this epic struggle. The initial Viking assault focused on breaching the city walls and gates. They employed battering rams, siege towers, and catapults to try and overcome the Parisian defenses. Abo Sarnouz, in his poem Mela Farisiae Urbis, describes the intensity of the initial attack. They assailed the walls with battering rams, their mighty blows shaking the very foundations of the city. They hurled stones and fire on their catapults, raining destruction upon the defenders. However, the Parisians, led by the valiant Count Odo, were prepared for this onslaught. They had strengthened their walls and constructed defensive towers, from which they rained down arrows, spears, and stones upon the attackers. The Annales Vedastini recounts a crucial moment in the early stages of the siege. The Northmen, having brought forward their siege engines, attempted to batter down the gates of the city, but the Parisians, with great courage, repelled their attacks, pouring down a hail of missiles upon the besiegers. A major turning point in the siege occurred when the Vikings attempted to destroy the Grand Pont, the main bridge connecting the Ile de la Cite to the mainland. They set fire to several ships and sent them drifting towards the bridge, hoping to burn it down and isolate the city from their resources. However, heavy rains extinguished the flames, and the bridge remained intact. This event is described in the Annales Valdenses. The Northmen, frustrated in their attempts to breach the walls, sought to destroy the bridge leading to the city. They set fire to several ships and sent them drifting towards the bridge. But the flames were extinguished by heavy rains, and their plan was thwarted. This failure to destroy the bridge was a significant setback for the Vikings. It prevented them from completely cutting off the city's supply lines and isolating the defenders. Another key tactic employed by the Vikings was mining. They attempted to dig tunnels beneath the city walls, hoping to collapse sections of the fortifications and create breaches for their forces to exploit. However, the Parisians were vigilant and countered these efforts by digging their own countermines, most likely. In his book Medieval Siege Warfare, military historian Peter Purton describes the challenges of siege warfare in this period. Siege warfare in the early Middle Ages was a complex and dangerous undertaking. Besiegers had to contend with a variety of defenses, including walls, moats, and towers. They also had to be wary of countermining and other defensive tactics employed by the besieged. Countermining basically means digging tunnels under your defensive walls to attack the besiegers from within. The same goes for when the attackers create tunnels under the defensive walls. Then they can breach the walls of the defenders and attack their forces from within. But despite their efforts, the Vikings managed to capture one of the defensive towers guarding the Petit Pont, a smaller bridge leading to the Ile de la Cite, where Paris is located, or was located. This was a critical moment in the siege, as it gave the Vikings a foothold within the city's defenses. Abu Sarnouz describes the fierce fighting for this important tower. The Northmen, with ferocious determination, stormed the tower, their axes and swords flashing in the sunlight. The defenders fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. The tower fell into the hands of the pagans, and the city trembled. However, the Parisians, led by Count Odo, launched a counterattack and recaptured the tower, preventing the Vikings from exploiting their breakthrough. This turning point is highlighted by historian Jim Bradbury in his book, The Routledge Companion to Medieval Warfare. He writes, "The recapture of the tower by the Parisians was a crucial moment in the siege. It demonstrated their resilience and their determination to resist the Viking onslaught. It also prevented the Vikings from gaining a decisive advantage." The siege of Paris in 1885 to 1886 was a testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of both the Viking attackers and the Parisian defenders. Just imagine the scene beneath the walls of Paris. a subterranean battleground where Viking and Persian forces clashed in a desperate struggle for control. This was the realm of mining and countermining, a dangerous and often deadly tactic employed during sieges in the Middle Ages. The Vikings were skilled in the art of mining. They would dig tunnels beneath the city walls. In his book Viking Warfare, archaeologist and historian Neil Price describes the process. Viking miners would work tirelessly, often in cramped and dangerous conditions, to excavate tunnels towards the enemy fortifications. They would shore up the tunnels with timber supports to prevent collapse and use tools like picks, shovels, and iron bars to break through the earth and stone. And these tunnels were not merely excavations, they were weapons of war. The Vikings would sometimes deliberately collapse the tunnels, hoping to bring down sections of the wall and create the opening for their assault. This tactic is described by military historian Peter Burton in his book Medieval Siege Warfare. He writes, "Mining was a risky tactic, but it could be devastatingly effective if successful. By undermining the foundations of a wall or a tower, the attackers could cause a catastrophic collapse, creating a breach for their forces to exploit." But the Parisians were not passive victims in this subterranean struggle. They most likely employed countermining techniques to thwart the Viking efforts, digging their own tunnels, intercepting the Viking mines, and engaging in fierce underground battles. While no specific accounts of countermining during the siege of Paris survives to this day, we know that this tactic was employed in other sieges of the period. For example, the Annales Santenses describes the use of countermining during a siege in Aachen in 1881, a siege preceding the siege in Paris. They write, "The Vikings, having besieged the city of Aachen, attempted to undermine its walls by digging tunnels. But the defenders, alerted to their scheme, dug countermines and drove the pagans back with great slaughter." This account, though referring to a different siege, illustrates the practice of countermining and the potential for fierce underground clashes. In his article Mining and Countermining in Medieval Siege Warfare, military historian Stephen Turnbull explains the challenges and dangers of this subterranean warfare. Countermining was a dangerous but effective tactic. The defenders would listen for the sounds of digging and attempt to intercept the enemy tunnels. Once contact was made, a fierce struggle would ensue, often resulting in hand-to-hand combat in the confined space of the mine. The risks were high, as the tunnels could collapse, suffocating those trapped inside. Think about that for a minute. You get your ear to the ground, listening for sounds of ferocious Vikings digging, attempting to attack your city. So you dig your own tunnels, listening, waiting, until you can hear the pickaxes of the Vikings nearing. Then you use your own shovels and pickaxes to try to meet them head-on in an underground battle in a cramped space where you can see the whites in the eyes of your enemies and stab them to death in ferocious battles. It's horrifying. The Parisians, facing the Viking threat, would have been aware of these dangers. They would have relied on their knowledge of the city's underground terrain and their engineering skills to effectively counter the Viking mines. Archaeological evidence also supports the use of mining and countermining in siege warfare during this period. Excavations at various siege sites have revealed traces of tunnels and underground chambers, providing tangible evidence of this subterranean struggle. In his book, Archaeological Investigations of the Viking Age in Francia, Richard Hodges notes, "Archaeological evidence of mining and countermining has been found at several Viking Age siege sites in Francia. These findings confirm the accounts in contemporary chronicles and provide valuable insights into the techniques and tactics employed in this form of warfare." While no such archaeological evidence has yet been found in Paris specifically related to the 8085 to 8086 siege, it is pretty probable that similar tactics were employed given the widespread use of mining and countermining in siege warfare during this period. Another important part of this struggle was the bridges of Paris. The bridges of Paris were vital arteries connecting the Ile de la Cité to the mainland. Paris was in fact on an island at this time, and it was not the sprawling metropolis we know today. The bridges leading to this island were key strategic points during the Viking sieges. Control of these bridges meant control of access to the city, its supplies, and potential escape routes. The struggle for the bridges was a fierce and dynamic one, with both Vikings and Parisians vying for dominance. The Grand Pont, the main bridge leading to the Ile de la Cité, was a focal point of the conflict. The Vikings, recognizing its importance, made repeated attempts to destroy or capture it. Abu Senous, in his poem Bella Parisiae Urbis, describes the strategic value of the bridge. He writes, "The Grand Pont, a vital link between the city and the mainland, was a prize coveted by both sides. The Northmen sought to seize it to cut off the city's lifeline and isolate its defenders. The Parisians, in turn, fought fiercely to protect this crucial passage." The Viking, using their longships, attempted to ram the bridge and set it ablaze. They also tried to dismantle it by hacking at its supports with axes. However, the Parisians, with their fortifications and defensive towers, were able to repel these attacks and maintain control of the bridge. The Annales d'Astini recounts one such attack. The Northmen, having assembled a fleet of their longships, launched a fierce assault on the Grand Pont. They rammed the bridge with their ships and attempted to set it ablaze, but the Parisians, with great courage, repelled their attack, raining down arrows and stones upon the invaders. The Parisians, under the leadership of Count Odo, recognized the importance of holding the bridge. They stationed troops on the bridge and in the nearby towers, constantly, vigilantly, keeping an eye on Viking attacks. In his book The Bridges of Paris, historian David McCulloch describes the strategic significance of the Grand Pont. The Grand Pont was not just a means of crossing the Seine, it was a symbol of the city's connection to the mainland and its ability to resist the Viking siege. Control of the bridge was essential for both the attackers and the defenders. The struggle for the Grand Pont was a microcosm of the larger siege. It was a test of strength, a battle of wills between the determined Vikings and resilient Parisians. But the fighting wasn't limited to only that bridge, the Grand Pont. Also, the Petit Pont, a smaller bridge leading to the southern side of the Ile de la Cite, where Paris was located, also saw its share of conflict. The Vikings, seeking to gain a foothold within the city's defenses, launched attacks on this bridge as well. Abu Sanus describes one such attack. He writes, the Northmen, having failed to capture the Grand Pont, turned their attention to the Petit Pont. They stormed the bridge with fierce determination, hoping to overwhelm the defenders and gain access to the city. The Parisians, however, were prepared. They had fortified the Petit Pont with towers and barricades, and they fought bravely to repel the Viking assaults. The Miracula Sancti Germani, a collection of miracles associated with Saint-Germain, Bishop of Paris, recounts a miraculous intervention during the fighting for the Petit Pont. They write, the Northmen, having breached the defenses of the Petit Pont, were about to overrun the city. But Saint-Germain, appearing in a vision to Bishop Goslin, inspired the defenders with renewed courage. The Parisians rallied and drove back the pagan horde, saving the city from certain destruction. While this account may be embellished with miraculous elements, it does reflect the importance of the Petit Pont in the defense of Paris and the determination of the Parisians to protect it. The bridges of Paris were vital battlegrounds during the Viking sieges. Control of these bridges shifted back and forth as both sides fought for dominance. The Parisians, through their courage and determination, were ultimately able to maintain control of these crucial access points, preventing the Vikings from completely isolating the city and achieving a decisive victory. To further understand the challenges faced by the Vikings, we turn to the work of archaeologist John Blair in his book The Anglo-Saxon Age. He writes, bridges in the early medieval period were often substantial structures built of stone and timber and defended by towers and fortifications. Attacking a well-defended bridge was a risky undertaking, exposing the attackers to missile fire and counterattacks. This might explain why the Vikings struggled to gain control over the Grand Pont and Petit Pont. The Parisians, anticipating the importance of the bridges, had fortified them with towers and stationed troops to defend them. The bridge itself was a sturdy structure built to withstand floods and heavy traffic, making it difficult to destroy quickly. Furthermore, the Parisians had the advantage of fighting from a defensive position, using their fortifications and ranged weapons to inflict casualties on the attacking Vikings. The Parisians, from their fortified positions on the bridge and in the nearby towers, were able to rain down a hail of missiles upon the attackers. Arrows, spears, and stones flew through the air, striking down many of the Northmen and forcing them to retreat, according to Abu Sednos. While the Parisians held the bridge itself and Ile de la Cite, the island where Paris lay, the Vikings controlled the land approaches to the bridge on the northern bank of the Seine. This meant that the Parisians were essentially trapped on the island, unable to venture out to gather supplies or reinforcements without risking confrontation with the Viking forces. This strategic situation is highlighted by historian David Lussum in his book Paris in the Early Middle Ages. He writes, while the Parisians held the Grand Pont, the Vikings controlled the access points to the bridge on the mainland. This created a stalemate, with neither side able to gain complete control of this vital crossing point. This might explain why the siege dragged on for so long. The Vikings, unable to capture the bridge, resorted to a blockade, hoping to starve the Parisians into submissions. The Parisians, in turn, endured hardship and privation, but they refused to surrender. The siege of Paris wasn't just about military strategy and clashing swords. It was also a story of human endurance, suffering, and resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. Imagine the conditions within the besieged city. Thousands of people crammed within the confines of the walls, facing dwindling supplies of food and water, the constant threat of attack by the Vikings, the fear of being captured or slain, and the sight of wounded and dying must have taken a heavy toll on the morale of the citizens. Abu Sanus writes, "Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and thirst parched their throats. Disease spread through the crowded city, claiming the lives of young and old. Fear gripped the hearts of the people, and despair clouded their minds. Many prayed for deliverance, while others cursed their fate." The Vikings were masters of warfare, utilizing their longships to penetrate deep into the heart of Francia via its extensive river network. The Seine, the Loire, the Rhine, and other major waterways became highways for Viking raiders, allowing them to strike at targets far inland, often catching communities off guard. The Annales Santenses provides a stark account of the widespread Viking raids. The Northmen, like a swarm of locusts, descended upon the land, pillaging and burning towns and villages along the rivers. No place was safe from their fury. This vivid description captures the sense of terror and devastation that accompanied Viking raids. They were not merely hit-and-run attacks, they were often prolonged campaigns, with Viking forces establishing temporary bases and extracting tribute from local populations. Historian Simon Copeland, in his book The Vikings in Francia, analyzes the strategic significance of rivers in Viking warfare. The rivers of Francia were vital arteries for trade and communication. The Vikings recognized this and exploited the river systems to their advantage, using them to penetrate deep into the Frankish heartland and launch attacks on unsuspecting communities. The Vikings' mastery of river navigation allowed them to bypass traditional land-based defenses and strike at targets that were previously considered secure and out of reach. This created a sense of vulnerability and insecurity throughout the Frankish kingdoms. The Chronicon Fontanes describes the Viking attacks on the Loire Valley. The Northmen, having sailed up the Loire, laid waste to the city of Tours and plundered the rich abbey of Saint-Martin. They carried off a vast amount of treasure and took many captives. The Vikings targeted wealthy monasteries and churches, which were often repositories of valuable relics and treasures. These raids not only resulted in the loss of precious artifacts, but also disrupted religious life and undermined the authority of the church. In her book The Frankish Church and the Carolingian Reforms, historian Maike de Jong examines the impact of Viking raids on religious institutions. The Viking raids had a devastating impact on the Frankish Church. Monasteries and churches were plundered and burned, and many religious communities were forced to flee their homes. The raids disrupted religious life and undermined the church's ability to provide spiritual guidance and social services. The Viking raids also disrupted trade and commerce, hindering economic activity and causing widespread hardship. Farmers were forced to abandon their fields, merchants were unable to transport their goods, and entire communities were left impoverished. The Annales Saint-Martin records the economic consequences of the Viking raids. The Northmen, by their frequent raids, have caused great damage to the kingdom. Trade has been disrupted, agriculture has been neglected, and many people have been reduced to poverty. The Viking raids were a major challenge for the Frankish kingdoms, testing their resilience and forcing them to adapt to a new era of insecurity and conflict. But the Franks were not passive victims. They fought back. They fortified their cities, and they developed new strategies to counter the Viking threat. For the people of Francia, the Viking raids were not just a physical threat, they were a spiritual crisis. The Vikings were pagans who worshipped gods deemed false and monstrous by Christian standards. They were seen as instruments of divine wrath, a punishment for the sins of the people. This sentiment is powerfully expressed in a letter written by Hincmar, Archbishop of Rheims, to King Charles the Bald. "The pagans have been allowed to scourge us because of our sins. We have provoked the Lord's anger by our wickedness and our neglect of his commandments. We must repent and turn back to God if we are to be delivered from this tribulation." Hincmar, a prominent figure in the Frankish Church, saw the Viking raid as divine chastisement, a call for repentance and spiritual renewal. This interpretation was echoed in sermons and writings across Francia, shaping the religious discourse of the time. Lupus of Ferrières, a renowned theologian and abbot, addressed the Viking threat in his sermons, urging his listeners to turn to God for protection. "Let us pray to the Almighty God, who alone can deliver us from the hands of his cruel enemies. Let us beseech him to have mercy on us and to turn away his wrath." Lupus, known for his intellectual rigor and spiritual depth, emphasized the importance of prayer and faith in the face of adversity. He encouraged the faithful to seek solace and strength in their religious beliefs. But the church's response to the Vikings wasn't solely passive. While prayer and repentance were emphasized, there were also instances of active resistance and attempts to convert the heathen invaders. Miracula Sancti Bertini, a collection of miracles associated with Saint Martin, recounts how monks tried to defend their abbey against the Viking attack. The monks, armed with nothing but their faith and the relics of Saint Martin, stood their ground against the pagan horde. Through the intercession of the saint, a thick fog descended upon the battlefield, confusing the Vikings and allowing the monks to escape unharmed. While this account may be embellished with miraculous elements, it does reflect the reality that monks sometimes try to defend their communities and sacred spaces and meet the Vikings head-on. De Vita Sancti Filiberti, a biography of Saint Philibert, founder of the monastery Noirmoutier, describes how the monks attempted to convert the Vikings. The monks, fearing for their lives and the safety of their monastery, went out to meet the Viking leader. They preached the word of God to him, hoping to turn his heart away from violence and towards the path of salvation. While the success of such attempts at conversion is debatable, they do demonstrate the Church's commitment to its mission of spreading the Christian faith, even in the face of immediate danger. In his book, The Conversion of Scandinavia, historian Anders Winroth explains, the conversions of the Vikings to Christianity was a gradual process, influenced by a variety of factors, including trade, political alliances, and missionary activity. While some Vikings were converted through peaceful persuasion, others were forced to accept baptism at sword points. The Viking raids, while initially a threat to Christianity, ultimately, in the bigger picture, played a role in the spread of the faith throughout Scandinavia. The interactions between Vikings and Christians, whether through conflict, trade, or missionary efforts, all gradually led to the integration of Viking societies into the Christian world. While the historical accounts paint a vivid picture of Viking raids and sieges, archaeology provides tangible evidence of their presence. Excavations in Paris and its surrounding regions have unearthed a wealth of artifacts, from weapons and jewelry to coins and pottery, offering valuable insights into Viking culture and their interactions with the Frankish world. In his book, Archaeological Investigations of the Viking Age in Francia, Richard Hodges highlights the importance of archaeological evidence. Archaeology allows us to move beyond the written word and access the material culture of the Vikings, providing a more nuanced understanding of their daily lives, their social structures, and their economic activities. One of the most significant archaeological discoveries related to the Vikings in Paris is the site of a Viking settlement at Pitre, located about 50 miles downstream from the city. Excavations at Pitre have revealed the remains of houses, workshops, and a harbor, suggesting a thriving Viking community that engaged in both raiding and trade. Neil Price, in his book The Vikings in Brittany, describes the significance of the Pitre site. Pitre provides compelling evidence of the Viking presence in the Seine Valley. The archaeological finds indicate a mixed community of Scandinavians and Franks, engaged in a variety of activities, including craft production, trade, and agriculture. The artifacts unearthed at Pitre, such as Scandinavian-style jewelry, weapons, and pottery, alongside Frankish coins and ceramics, point to a complex interplay of cultural exchange and interaction between the Vikings and the local population. But the evidence from Pitre goes even deeper. In their article Pitre, a Viking Emporium in Francia, archaeologists Stéphane Lebec and Elisabeth Laurent analyzed the spatial organization of this settlement. The layout of the settlement at Pitre, with its clear division between areas dedicated to craft production, trade, and habitation, suggests a well-organized and prosperous community. The presence of a harbor with evidence of shipbuilding and repair further emphasizes the importance of maritime activities for the inhabitants of Pitre. This detailed analysis of the site reveals a complex and dynamic Viking community integrated into the wider economic and social networks of the Frankish region. But the archaeological evidence isn't limited to settlements. Shipwrecks, too, have yielded valuable insights into Viking shipbuilding techniques and maritime activities. In 1992, a Viking ship dating back to the 9th century was discovered in the Seine River near Rouen. This well-preserved vessel, known as the Rouen Longship, provides invaluable information about Viking ship construction and navigation. Hodges, in his book, describes the significance of the Rouen Longship. The Rouen Longship is a remarkable example of Viking shipbuilding technology. Its construction and design revealed the Vikings' mastery of woodworking and their ability to build seaworthy vessels capable of navigating both rivers and open seas. The Rouen longship, along with other shipwreck discoveries, sheds light on the Vikings' maritime capabilities and their extensive trade networks, which stretched across Europe and beyond. In their article, Viking Shipwrecks and the Archaeology of Maritime Trade, archaeologists Frederick Giebel and Palissier analyzed the evidence from shipwrecks found in Francia. The shipwrecks provide a snapshot of the goods that were being transported along the rivers and coastlines of Francia during the Viking Age. The cargoes include a wide range of items, from raw materials like timber and iron to luxury goods like silks and spices, indicating the extensive trade networks that connected Scandinavia with the rest of Europe. These shipwrecks serves as kind of time capsules, revealing the vibrant exchange of goods and ideas that characterized the Viking Age. The sieges of Paris were not bloodless affairs. While historical chronicles recount the broad strokes of battle and destruction, archaeology provides a chillingly intimate glimpse into the human costs of these conflicts. Excavations in and around Paris have unearthed skeletal remains bearing the unmistakable marks of violence, offering stark evidence of the suffering endured by those caught in the crossfire. In his book, The Archaeology of Violence, archaeologist Christopher Knussel discusses the importance of skeletal analysis in understanding past conflicts. Skeletal remains can provide compelling evidence of violence and warfare. Trauma such as blade injuries, arrow wounds, and blunt force trauma to the skull can reveal the brutal realities of combat and the suffering inflicted upon individuals and communities. Excavation near the Seine River uncovered skeletal remains with evidence of sharp force trauma, likely inflicted by Viking swords and axes. These findings corroborate the historical accounts of brutal hand-to-hand combat during the sieges. In their article, The Osteology of Conflict, Evidence from Viking Age Burials in England, archaeologists Søren Sindbeck and Keith Dobney analyzed skeletal trauma in the context of Viking raids. The patterns of skeletal trauma observed in Viking Age burials, including those in England, are consistent with the historical accounts of violent conflict. The presence of multiple healed and unhealed injuries suggests that individuals were exposed to repeated episodes of violence throughout their lives. While this quote refers to England, the findings are still relevant to understanding the violence experienced in Francia as well. The Parisians, like their counterparts in England, would have faced the constant threat of injury or death during the Viking raids and sieges. Archaeological evidence also reveals the aftermath of violence. Mass graves containing the hastily buried remains of multiple individuals have been discovered in areas associated with Viking attacks. In his book Medieval Violence, a reader, historian Thomas Bisson discusses the significance of mass graves. Mass graves are a poignant reminder of the brutality of warfare and the indiscriminate nature of violence. They represent the tragic consequences of conflict for individuals and communities, and they offer a sobering perspective of the human cost of historical events. The discovery of mass graves near Paris, containing the remains of men, women, and children, underscores the indiscriminate nature of Viking violence and the suffering inflicted upon the civilian population. The Viking sieges, particularly the prolonged siege of 8085 to 8086, exposed the weak defenses of Paris, but they also served as a catalyst for change, prompting the Parisians to invest in their defenses and strengthen their city. Andrew Wallace Hadrill, in his book The Growth of the Parisian Region, emphasizes this point. The Viking incursions were a turning point in the history of Paris. They forced the city to confront its weaknesses and to invest in the infrastructure and fortifications necessary to withstand future attacks. After the siege of 8086, the Parisians embarked on a major program of fortification, expanding and strengthening the city walls. They also constructed new bridges and fortified towers to protect key access points to Ile de la Cité, the island where the Paris castle lay. David Lissom, in his book Paris in the Early Middle Ages, describes these developments. The fortifications of Paris were significantly enhanced in the aftermath of the Viking sieges. The city walls were rebuilt and extended, and new defensive structures, such as the Grand Châtelet, were constructed to protect key strategic points. These fortifications not only provided physical protection, but also served as a symbol of the city's resilience and determination to resist future attacks. Paris was becoming a formidable fortress, a stronghold that would be difficult to conquer. The Viking sieges played a crucial role in forging a sense of community and civic pride among the Parisians, according to Wallace Hadrill. They shared the experience of defending their city against the common enemy, which fostered a sense of solidarity and contributed to the development of a distinct urban identity. The sieges also had a profound impact on the political landscape of Paris. The heroic defense of the city by Count Odo elevated his status and influence, ultimately leading to his election as king of the West Franks in 8088. This marked a shift in power from the Carolingian dynasty to a new line of rulers who were more closely associated with Paris. To understand the significance of Odo's leadership, let's delve deeper into the primary sources. The Annales de Rastini praises his actions. Odo, Count of Paris, a man of great courage and wisdom, defended the city with unwavering determination. He inspired the people to resist the pagan invaders and led them to victory. This chronicle highlights Odo's bravery and his ability to rally the Parisians against the Viking threat. His leadership during the siege earned him widespread respect and admiration, paving the way for his ascension to the throne. Another chronicle, the Chronicon Saint-Maxentin, further emphasizes Odo's role. Odo, by his valor and leadership, saved Paris from falling into the hands of the Northmen. He proved himself a worthy leader, capable of defending the kingdom and upholding its Christian values. But Odo's rise to prominence wasn't solely due to his military prowess. Historian Janet L. Nelson, in her book Charles the Bold, argues that Odo's political acumen also played a crucial role. Odo was not only a skilled warrior, but also a shrewd politician. He used his success in defending Paris to build alliances and consolidate his power base. His election as king was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated campaign to gain support from key factions within the Frankish kingdom. But Odo wasn't alone in his efforts. Abu Sernous, in his poem Bella Parisiae Urbis, also praises the bravery of Bishop Gozlan, who fought alongside Odo in defense of the city. Gozlan, the bishop, a man of God and a warrior of Christ, took up arms to defend his flock. He inspired the defenders with his courage and his unwavering faith. The Viking sieges, while initially a source of trauma and destruction, ultimately contributed to the rise of Paris as a major political and economic center. The city's strengthened defenses, its growing population, and its association with the monarchy all contributed to its increasing importance in the Frankish kingdoms. The Viking incursions were a catalyst for the development of a more centralized and effective monarchy in Francia. The inability of the Carolingians to provide adequate defense against the Vikings led to a shift in power towards regional leaders like Odo of Paris, who were able to demonstrate their military capabilities and political acumen. The siege was finally lifted in the fall of 886, not by military victory, but by a hefty ransom paid to the Vikings by the Frankish king Charles the Fat. This decision, while bringing an end to the immediate crisis, would have significant repercussions for Charles' reign and the future of the West Frankish kingdom. The Annals Vertiniani records the payment of the ransom. Charles, king of the Franks, gave the Northmen 700 pounds of silver to depart from Paris. This was a substantial sum, equivalent to several $1 million in today's currency. It represented a significant financial burden for the Frankish kingdom and a humiliating concession to the Viking invaders. To truly understand the magnitude of this ransom, we turn to the analysis of historian Simon Kaufman in his book The Vikings in Francia. The ransom paid to the Vikings in 886 was one of the largest ever recorded in the Viking Age. It represented a significant portion of the West Frankish kingdom's annual revenue and placed a considerable strain on its finances. Kaufman argues that this financial strain contributed to the weakening of the Frankish monarchy and its ability to defend its territories against future Viking attacks. But the ransom was more than just a financial transaction. It was a symbol of weakness, a sign that the Frankish king was unable to protect his own capital from Viking aggression. This perception of weakness would have serious consequences for Charles' authority and his ability to maintain control over his kingdom. The Chronicon Saint-Maxentin provides a contemporary perspective of the ransom payment. The king, fearing for the safety of the city and its inhabitants, decided to pay the Northmen a large sum of money to leave. This decision was met with dismay by many, who saw it as a shameful act of submission. This chronicle highlights the sense of shame and humiliation felt by many Franks at the king's decision to pay the ransom. But it also reveals the difficult choice faced by Charles the Fat, caught between the desire to protect his people and the need to preserve his own authority. Historian Rosamund McKittrick, in her book The Frankish Kingdoms in the 9th Century, analyzes the political fallout from the ransom payment. The payment of a large ransom to the Vikings in 886 damaged Charles the Fat's reputation and contributed to his downfall. It was seen as a sign of weakness and incompetence, and it fueled discontent among the Frankish nobility. Charles' decision to pay the ransom was met with criticism from many quarters. Some saw it as a betrayal of the Parisians who had bravely defended the city. Others viewed it as a sign of Charles' lack of resolve and his inability to provide effective leadership. The Annales Fuldenses captures this sentiment. Many criticized the king for his weakness in dealing with the Northmen, saying that he should have fought them rather than pay their tribute. The discontent with Charles' leadership grew, and within a year he was deposed by the Frankish nobility. The kingdom was plunged into further political turmoil, with various factions vying for power. The Gesta non Manorum Ducum by William of Unier, written a century later, offers a retrospective view of the events. He writes, "The king, having lost the support of his people, was unable to resist the rebellion of the nobility. He was deposed and died shortly thereafter, leaving the kingdom in a state of chaos." The aftermath of the siege of Paris was a period of uncertainty and instability. The Vikings, though they had been paid off, remained a threat. The Frankish kingdom, weakened by internal divisions and a lack of strong leadership, was vulnerable to further Viking incursions. However, the siege also had some positive consequences. It demonstrated the resilience of the Parisians and their ability to resist Viking aggression. It also highlighted the strategic importance of Paris and the need for strong defenses to protect the city from future attacks. The Annals Verastini offers a glimpse into the Viking perspective. The Northmen, having received a large sum of silver and other treasures, departed from Paris, rejoicing in their spoils. This brief entry suggests that the Vikings were quite satisfied with the outcome. They had achieved their primary objective, acquiring wealth, without suffering a decisive military defeat. But what did they do with this newfound wealth? Historian Peter Sawyer, in his book The Age of the Vikings, sheds light on how Vikings typically used their plunder. Viking raiders often used their plunder to enhance their status and power back home. They might invest in land, build grander houses, or distribute wealth to their followers to maintain loyalty. The ransom from Paris likely fueled further Viking expeditions and strengthened the position of Viking leaders within their own communities. It also likely stimulated trade and economic activity in Scandinavia. In his article, The Economic Impact of Viking Raids, historian Richard Hodges argues the influx of wealth from raids and trade had a significant impact on the Scandinavian economy. It stimulated the development of craft production, trade networks in urban centers. The ransom from Paris, along with other plunder acquired through raiding and trading, contributed to the growth and prosperity of Viking society. It allowed them to invest in new technologies, expand their trade networks, and strengthen their military capabilities. But the ransom also had a more symbolic meaning for the Vikings. It demonstrated their ability to challenge the established powers of Europe and extract concessions from them. It reinforced their reputation as formidable warriors and skilled negotiators. In his book The Viking World, historian James Graham Campbell notes, the payment of ransoms to the Vikings was not simply a matter of financial transaction. It also served as a form of recognition of their power and influence. It acknowledged their ability to disrupt and destabilize the political order of Europe. The siege of Paris and its aftermath had a profound impact on both the Franks and the Vikings. For the Frank, it was a time of crisis and political upheaval. For the Vikings, it was a time of triumph and consolidation of their power. In his book The Carolingian World, historian Geoffrey Koziol argues the siege of Paris in 1885 to 1886 exposed the vulnerabilities of the Carolingian system of governance. The inability of Charles the Fat to effectively respond to the Viking threat highlighted the growing weakness of the central monarchy and the increasing power of regional magnates like Odo of Paris. Koziol suggests that the siege was a symptom of the broader decline of the Carolingian Empire. The inability of the king to protect his capital city undermined his authority and fueled the ambitions of regional leaders who sought to assert their independence. Historian Catherine Holman, in her article Viking Raids and Carolingian Responses, further explores this theme. The Viking raids of the 9th century forced the Carolingian rulers to adapt their military strategies and political structures. The increasing reliance on local defenses and the rise of powerful regional figures like Odo of Paris marked a significant shift in the balance of power within the Frankish kingdoms. In his book The Vikings and the Carolingian Empire, historian Rorik Turk examines the long-term consequences of the siege. The siege of Paris in 1885 to 1886 contributed to the fragmentation of the Carolingian Empire and the emergence of new political entities in Francia. It also had a lasting impact on the development of Paris, which became a symbol of resistance to Viking aggression, a major center of power in the West Frankish kingdom. The siege of Paris in 1885 to 1886 was a pivotal event in the history of the Viking Age and the Frankish kingdoms. It was a story of courage, resilience, and political transformation. The events of this tumultuous period would have a lasting impact on the course of European history, shaping the destiny of both the Franks and the Vikings.